China and India are significantly reducing their purchases of oil from Russia, and India is stopping imports of Russian oil completely. Donald Trump made a bold statement today, and fortunately he was right. United States sanctions against Russia are so ineffective that the value of Rosneft and Lukoil as companies has plummeted by billions of dollars. And India has officially announced that it is completely refusing to buy Russian oil. The Indian company Reliance Industries, the largest buyer of Russian oil in the country, has announced its intention to comply with Western sanctions against Moscow, which means a complete refusal of Russian oil. Meanwhile, several Chinese companies have halted Russian oil purchases to assess the effects of United States sanctions. Donald Trump also plans to discuss China's purchase of Russian oil with Xi Jinping on Thursday, October 30. Let's analyze together how painfully American sanctions have already hit Russia and whether India and China will really refuse Russian oil. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is October 26th. Let's discuss this topic together. It's a very rich one. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave any comment under this episode. Also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. It says there, support Alexei Pechi's channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you, whether it's a donation, sponsorship, or a paid subscription. I will be grateful for any support you give. So, Russia, the world's second largest oil exporter, is now weighing how to respond to new American sanctions against its two oil giants, Rosneft and Lukoil, as well as the potential reduction of oil supplies to India and China. Because the United States is only raising the stakes, and Trump is clearly determined to strangle the Russian economy if Putin does not agree to negotiations to end the war against Ukraine. Let me quickly remind you, what did the United States do? On Wednesday, the United States Treasury Department sanctioned Rosneft, Lukoil, several subsidiaries, and urged Moscow to agree to a Ukraine ceasefire. These two companies account for about half of Russia's oil production, which is more than 5% of the world's total output. In January, the United States Treasury Department had already imposed sanctions against the energy sector of the Russian Federation. However, these measures did not have a significant impact on oil exports from Russia, since those sanctions did not have much substance behind them. At that time, Washington targeted what is known as Moscow's shadow fleet. The sanctions impacted over 180 vessels, along with many trading and oil service companies, insurers, and officials. But since there was a change of power in the White House at that time, these sanctions were not strictly enforced because Trump was betting on diplomacy with Putin. And the direct sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil themselves are actually not as painful as their secondary effects. All over the world, people are now assessing the risks of cooperating with Russian companies that have come under American sanctions. Well, for example, Indian oil refineries, including Reliance Industries, are planning to reduce or even completely stop importing oil from Russia. This was reported by sources in India's oil refining industry. According to the International Energy Agency, in the first 9 months of 2025, India purchased 1.9 million barrels per day from Russia. This is about 40% of Russia's total oil exports. To be more specific, the Indian company Reliance Industries, the largest buyer of Russian oil in the country, has announced its intention to comply with Western sanctions against Moscow. This was already stated in the company's official announcement. So Reliance, controlled by billionaire Mukesh Ambani and operating the world's largest oil refining complex in Jamnagar, has a long-term contract to purchase about 500,000 barrels of oil per day from Rosneft. The statement stresses the company will comply with sanctions. Earlier, Bloomberg had already reported that this company is shifting its focus to Middle Eastern and American grades of oil, including Saudi, Iraqi, and Qatari. And according to traders, in October the company already purchased at least 10 million barrels on the spot market, mostly Middle Eastern grades. And according to Bloomberg sources, other Indian oil refining companies are also considering reducing their purchases of Russian oil. What does all this mean for Russia? The tightening of the sanctions regime will likely force Russia What should be done? To offer more significant discounts to buyers. That is, once again, oil and gas revenues provide up to a quarter of the federal budget of the Russian Federation and remain key sources of funding for the so-called special military operation against Ukraine. But here it's important to note one key point. Oil companies in Russia pay a tax to the budget based on the volume of oil they extract. Therefore, sanctions will only be able to hit Russia's budget if Russia is forced to reduce production. That's why there's this whole struggle, and the idea is that no one should buy oil from Russia. If no one buys it, they'll produce less. Accordingly, less money will go into Russia's treasury. It's important to consider how Russia could react to sanctions and reduced oil purchases from India and, to some extent, China. There's really no way, but let's consider options. Halting oil exports is one possibility. But this would hit Russia's allies, including China, and would lead to consequences. That's exactly what the West wants, lower Moscow revenues. As I mentioned, there won't be any revenue coming into the budget. There are those proud Russians who will say, we'll just cut off oil completely, we won't sell to anyone at all. Among other possible steps is restricting the export of other key goods, such as enriched uranium, palladium, or titanium. But this also harms the Russian economy. An alternative could be expanding cooperation with China in the field of rare earth metals. According to the United States Geological Survey, Russia ranks 5th in the world in reserves of these rare earth metals. And a partnership with China will hinder United States efforts to counter Beijing's dominance. But while Russia is still considering this idea, the United States is already taking steps in this direction. And today, literally today, Trump signed trade agreements with Cambodia, Thailand, and Malaysia specifically for access to their rare earth metals. I discussed this in a previous episode. If you haven't seen it, subscribe to the channel and watch it. Russia also has some leverage over Western oil companies. Russia controls exports through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which mainly transports oil from Kazakhstan. The extraction is carried out by a group of companies, including the American companies Chevron and ExxonMobil, but reducing these supplies would hurt Kazakhstan, with which Moscow has close economic and defense ties. It turns out that wherever Russia tries to respond, it will end up hurting itself. Here you might ask, what about Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus? Because Russia is one of the largest producers among the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus countries, which together account for about half of the world's oil production. So in recent months, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus has been gradually lifting production restrictions, aiming to increase its market share. Sanctions against Russian oil could complicate alliance negotiations to further raise quotas. On the other hand, this is an opportunity for other Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus cartel members to simply push out a competitor like Russia from the global market. And what about China? China, along with India, is one of the largest buyers of Russian oil. The two countries announced a partnership without limits in February 2022 when Vladimir Putin visited Beijing just a few days before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. Russia accounts for about 20% of China's oil imports. On October 23, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs opposed unilateral sanctions, commenting on United States restrictions against Rosneft and Lukoil. However, as several trading sources reported on the same day, Chinese state oil companies still suspended purchases delivered by sea of Russian oil until they assess the risks and receive a signal from the Chinese authorities. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinion and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.